You can learn to sew a cozy spring table runner in no time with this tutorial. If you want to create this cottage farmhouse table runner, you want to start by measuring the dimensions of your table so you know exactly what size you want to make it. Sketch your design and cut out your heart template. These are 3-inch squares and 2-inch hearts. You will be cutting out these hearts that you're going to applique to these squares. Select your fabrics for the project. This is a great time to use up any scraps that you have from leftover projects. This is a roll of Ultra Hold Heat and Bond fabric adhesive. When you heat it with the iron, it will permanently bond fabrics together. Be careful not to touch your iron to the adhesive part of the material. You can use a pressing cloth or paper towels to protect your surfaces. Trim the excess. Be careful not to overheat. Turn your fabric over, leave the paper backing on, and begin to trace your heart pattern that you have previously drawn and cut out. This is a wood one that I happen to have. You will then cut out all of your hearts and all of the squares you will be using to make your quilted runner. In this project, I cut out a total of 44 hearts and 44 squares. These quilting squares are cut out 4 by 4 inches. This gives a 1/2 inch seam allowance on each side. The squares will also need to be backed with a stabilizer to strengthen them for sewing the edges of the hearts on the sewing machine. You can iron on your fusible interfacing to one solid piece of fabric. This project is made with scraps, and so I'm piecing them together and trimming away the excess interfacing. Remove the paper backing from the hearts and expose the adhesive ready surface. Center them and heat them with a hot iron. Here I am using a white thread, but you can thread your machine with whichever color you prefer. If you have decorative stitches on your sewing machine, this is a perfect time to use them. You can also use a simple zigzag stitch to create the similar effect. Sew around the edge of your heart where it meets the block, overlapping slightly onto the heart and slightly onto the square block. Each of these are done with a different decorative stitch. Be creative and arrange your hearts in whichever pattern you like. Refer to your sketch to where you will place your hearts. This is 4 by 11 squares and 4 rows total. You can make your hearts go all the same way or in multitude of different ways. You will begin sewing your squares together to form a chain. Make sure you're keeping your hearts facing the correct way that you have laid them out. Sew your squares together with a basic top stitch and a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you place your rows back in the correct order so you do not lose track. Then one at a time, flip your row over and flatten the seams with the iron. Keep your rows in the correct order for this next step. You will flip one over and pin and sew 2 of the long rows together. Try to line up the seams so there's no shifting and unevenness at the end. After you sew 2 rows together, you will then sew the other 2 rows together, and then you will join them and sew all 4 rows together. Next, you will iron the remaining 3 long rows of seams flat. Now that it is ironed flat, cut a coordinating backing out in the same size. You're going to cut the backing and, if you'd like, insert a batting. It's a good idea to take another measurement so you can cut an accurate size piece. This is cut from scrap fabric, so I pieced together the backing as well as the batting that is made from this soft, medium, very lightweight, thin batting. Layer the 3 pieces together with the right sides facing out. Pin and sew the 3 pieces together. You will use about a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a basic top stitch and sew all the way around the outer side of the rectangle. The next step is to quilt the 3 pieces together. Here I'm sewing along either side of each seam with about a 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch away from the seam. The next step is to create a binding for the edge. To create the binding, you're going to cut the fabric on the bias. My cutting mat has a line showing a 45-degree angle. This bias tape I'm cutting at about 2.5 inches wide, and I'm using the yardstick to guide where I'm going to cut. I prefer to trim the ends square and then face the fabric right sides together and sew diagonally across and trim off the excess triangle. The reason for sewing the seams at a diagonal is to reduce the bulk when it's folded over at the seam. The next step is to heat your iron and begin folding your bias tape in half to create a single fold bias. Then you will unfold and fold those sides in to meet in the center crease, and this creates a double fold. You can see here I'm folding it over one more time and pressing it with the iron. Next, change the thread on your machine to match the binding. Start at the bottom and sew the binding all the way around the quilted runner. Sew in about a 1/2 inch away from the edge to connect your binding to your quilted runner. If you want, you can machine sew the top side, fold it over, and hand tack the bottom side to the back of the quilted runner. Carefully sew the material around the corners. There are many ways you can do this, and I am doing a bit of a cheat just folding it around here. And when you reach the bottom, you'll want to fold it over and sew those pieces together so it doesn't fray. Once you've sewn the binding on, your project is complete and ready to use. This is perfect for cottage or farmhouse decorating, to have a tea party on, or style through the spring and summer seasons. It also makes a great gift, and it's a wonderful project for scrap busting all those fabric pieces you've been saving. I hope this tutorial has inspired you to sew some romantic spring table decor.